So, welcome to the Tragedy Academy, a show created to bridge societal divides in a judgment-free zone using candor and humor. My name is Jay, and today we are joined by Dr. Samantha Hart, physical therapist, author, performing artist, podcast host, and a sober mom of two, and a recent author as well. How are you doing today, Dr. Hart?
I am great. I am so excited because this is my favorite thing to do, truly. You don't know this about me, but I made a decision, and we'll get into this as we talk, but 2 years ago, to have two metrics for my life every day that I wake up. The first one is joy, which falls right into humor, right? And the second one is truth, honesty, transparency.
Authenticity, if you will.
So coming onto a podcast where that is literally what it's all about is already the ingredients for a really good day. So I'm really happy to be here.
Well, I love those kind words, and I like your outlook as well. In fact, you struck a chord with me when you said the word joy, because I have a similar analogy for something that I read from you. And if I said, if I held hands with my suffering, joy would find me. Can you explain that? Because that is an excerpt from your recent book.
It is. Damn, I'm a good writer.
You are. That hit home, because I usually say you have to be able to lay with your lion, right? Meaning that other side of you has to be something you embrace and love and respect, right? So that you can be comfortable with your life. So that's why this spoke to me when I read it. I was like, wow.
Yeah. You know, I have spent prior to recovery and truly prior to the last decade, because I'm 15 years in recovery, but I really only, thank you, started to get well a decade ago. And the reason my life changed, the reason I was able to discover joy on the other side of things like betrayal and grief is because I finally stopped chasing the dirty white bunny out there in the world that was going to make me okay. You know,
oh man, that thing. I like the dirty white bunny. That's a great way to describe it.
Oh
I like your metaphors already.
So, it's like follow the white rabbit. If you just follow the white rabbit, if you just get the degree, if you just get the house and get the body and get the boyfriend, you'll be happy. Well, I call bullshit because boy, did I try. And when all of those outside things that I was chasing deep into my sobriety, by the way,
100%,
when all of that collapsed and I was just left with me, with a shell of me, and I had to reboot and rebuild from the inside out. When I sat with myself in my suffering and I literally wrapped my arms around myself for the first time as a 30-year-old woman, I slowly started to uncover the voice of my intuition, clear my shame, and then I could hear this whisper of whatever the next right thing in my life was. Some intuitive thought or action, some level of divine inspiration, if you want to call it that. Because prior to that, I was being run by my inner critic. Run straight into the ground, straight into insanity. Yeah. So every ounce of joy I've ever discovered and felt as a grown woman has only been a direct result of holding hands with my own suffering. There is no other way, right? The only way out is through.
That is 100% correct. And I beat an analogy up all the time that if we were born as a length of rope and every time we came to a trial or tribulation, we were given the option of putting a knot in it or going through it in that moment. Most people tie knots in it, but what happens to your rope by the end of a cycle of tying it in knots? It's just a wadded mess of shit, right? It's not going to help you. It's not going to help others. So way to go for offering your pile of shit to others to help them out, because we like to think that we got our stuff together, but we don't have anything really to give out. We're giving them a knot. Thanks, man. Exactly. What am I towing with this, right? So that's kind of how I like to view it.
I love that analogy.
It serves a lot of purposes, and it reminds me in the moment that I have to make that conscious decision as to whether I want to make this a future issue. Right.
Yeah.
And that resonated with me when somebody told that to me at one point. They were like, hey, look, whatever you don't do today, you don't have to think about tomorrow. Right. And that can be good, bad, or indifferent. But if you choose to let an emotion become who you are in a moment, you kind of engrave it in yourself for future use, because shame doesn't show up right in the moment. Shame has a nasty way of validating itself, justifying itself, and then hiding in the wings until, you need to start glugging on some kind of alcohol or nose candy or whatever to keep Mr. Shame behind the curtain. And it is a cycle.
Oh God. Shame is,
It's a bastard.
God damn it. In recovery, there's this saying that resentment is the number one offender. And it's the thing that takes more addicts out into a relapse than anything else. And
I want to be able to do it too.
I'm not saying resentment is good for our souls. It's certainly poisonous when we hang on to it. However, I would go way below that and argue that shame is the thing, addict or not, by the way, that kills our spirit. And then if you anesthetize that long enough, it actually kills us. I think it is the most corrosive thing that we hold on to in our whole lives. And it creates a shade of darkness across everything that matters. Your relationship to yourself, your relationship to others, your work life, your friendships, your romantic relationships. It corrodes the quality of how you see yourself and therefore how you see everything else.
You're on that station. Your radio frequency is shit radio, and you're taking it everywhere with you on your shoulder like an 80s boombox and expecting everybody to want to listen to. But you're really just screwing up everybody's situation because you're not taking care of yourself. You're not taking the time to nurture you so that when you're around them, you're not bringing the collective group down, right? You get to earn your spot with friends by taking care of yourself first.
It's interesting because everything you're saying is so spot on, and it is spot on for the person who is awake and aware. But boy, for the person, and I'm speaking about myself, by the way, and everything else I've observed personally and professionally over the years. But from my own experience, I don't know how many decisions, actions, and behaviors I have gone through again and again and again, repetitively, insanely, from a subconscious place that were so utterly detrimental to me and to the people I was around. And I mean, in my case, quite extreme, right? A cocaine overdose wasn't the thing. And it woke me up for a second and made me feel really afraid that maybe I don't have control over drugs and alcohol after all. Maybe. But it didn't wake me up to the deep subconscious operating patterns I was living by. In fact, that really didn't happen until 5 years sober in a marital crisis, when I had tried every coping mechanism I had ever used that worked wonders when I was a young girl to keep me safe, like pleasing and performing and perfecting, getting me outside to be just so that I felt safe and whole.
Tending the garden in front of your house so that people like your curb appeal. Exactly. Nothing behind it. Old Western set.
Exactly. But it wasn't until that completely failed and I was face down in a pit of despair, and I had a bunch of options. It was one of those crossroads. I could have relapsed.
Easily.
And chosen to die, because that would have been that choice. I could keep on running on the programming, try a new version of it, which I had pretty substantial evidence that didn't work, or I could try something new. That was the moment. And this is what's so tricky about change, what I really feel is true about the science of change, right? We operate the way we do because it's ingrained and it's learned. And those feedback loops are very, very strong.
Mm.
Then we have a pain point, and it has to be significant enough. This could be your physical body or your emotional, spiritual body. You have a significant pain point, which wakes you up. So for me, my overdose, it woke me up, but it wasn't significant enough to convince me that I had to go all the way down to the bottom and start truly rewiring. I just thought I had this little tiny thing to fix. In the marital crisis, that woke me up so much because I had now 5 years of evidence of living a certain way sober, and I was still miserable. And I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do now in this window of opportunity where the pain is so extreme that I cannot go on living in the pain? Because even though I'm afraid of whatever I have to do to get out of the pain, even though I'm so afraid, I am more afraid to keep living this way. And then you make the jump and then you start to practice new behaviors. So you take the consciousness of you waking up and then you implement new thoughts, actions, and behaviors consistently. So you build new feedback loops and you eventually change your life. You eventually rediscover your intuitive voice, what joy feels like, what laughter sounds like. But you're speaking about consciousness, and there are millions of people out there that are the walking dead.
You're absolutely right. I believe that humanity lives in kind of a fog and also in a state of make-believe where it's a genetic and hereditary disease that we continue to implement that's handed from our parents before us and our grandparents and our great-grandparents, and that we do inherit shame, past issues. You know, it's not just about heart disease or breast cancer. It's also about, you know, someone that has lived with an extensive amount of guilt or shame having a child and passing it right on through, right? That doesn't go away. We don't like what we can't see. That scares the shit out of us, right? But it's there. Obviously, that's why when you look at a child and it gives you a witty look that's of one of their parents, that should give you a clue, right? They have the same mannerisms. Why wouldn't they have the base programming in there too? And you brought that up. You were like, you're talking about all of these foundational things that were built on sand, right? Instead of brick.
Yeah.
And that there's a cycle that happens with addictions. It'll start out with someone being traumatized, a child, a person in despair, and they will what? Not have the coping mechanisms, because the majority of the time you come out of a setting that doesn't necessarily have people handing out a toolbox with emotional tools for you to leave the house with at 18, right? No, you walk out there and you just try to make it shut up. Make it shut up and make me feel loved. That's it. That's your two things, loved and shut up. And you continue to do it. But there's a nasty thing about it. The shame shows up after the self-medication. And then after the self-medication, it cycles back. And then over time, the addict is now more ashamed of being an addict than they are recognizing that they got kicked in the junk when they were 5.
Exactly.
Right? They don't correlate the two. So that's a really important way to look at it, because we have to be able to look at the child inside of us and have, compassion for them, right? And you go back to your authenticity. You allow yourself to what? Hit those crossroads like you explained. That's where I like to say you have to be on your knees to plant a tree. You planted your tree. It just took you time to find the right water and fertilizer. But I'll be damned, people do it all the time. They hit the ground, they get into an accident, they have some kind of, loss of a loved one, whatever it is, snap. Okay, life needs to be different, right? But the cool thing about hitting your knees is that you don't have to be ashamed of who you were before that day. And that's really what's the trailer holding you back from your full potential, right? It's hooked onto you. And you're actually holding it with your own hands over your shoulders like Santa's sack, running down the road, not realizing that you had the ability to let it go the whole time. That it wasn't anything you needed in the moment, except for the memory of how to traverse that from the past. Your metal is now tested. You are tried and true. You've went through the crash test. You've been the dummy. You go, hey, look, I can't go over 60 miles an hour anymore. That's it. But I know it in my heart of hearts because I've taken a wall at 60 miles an hour, right?
Yep.
That's how I like to look at it.
Yeah. It's funny what's coming up as you're talking, because I'm thinking about the shame brain, right? The brain that's just in that loop. And in my case, it was so important that there was someone else who asked me probably the most important question of my whole life, which is, have you ever made an amends to yourself? Nobody had ever asked me that. And it definitely would never have occurred to me as a professional self-lacerator. If you're listening to this and you're not an addict, if you're listening to this and you're just type A, well, congratulations, you're being run by your inner critic, most likely. And if nobody has ever said to you, by the way, you're actually a really good person, even if you've made some bad choices. You're not a bad person who's made bad choices, and you are able to let yourself off the hook. And in fact, if you make a mistake and you let yourself off the hook and say, okay, what can we learn from that? How can we do better next time? And lovingly speak to yourself into an even better space, you will be wildly more productive and successful. See, we think as type A perfectionists that if we let ourselves off the hook for a second, we'll lose our desire and our drive to go and get those things that we're so ambitious about, right? Those things outside of us that are going to make us okay, ha, 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 joke's on us. So I feel like, it's sort of like the sick brain can't help itself. It needs some sort of outside intervention. So that moment when this woman walked into my life and we did the 12 steps in a modern and trauma-informed way around the marital crisis and not with any type of religious connotation, and we got to the 9th step and she said, have you ever made an amends to yourself? If she did not interrupt my inner critic who was sitting in the seat of CEO running my life into the ground, if she did not arrest that voice in that moment for 1 second, I don't know if I would be sitting here right now. I needed someone outside of my own brain with a fresh perspective to ask me that question. And then I got infused with an idea that was beyond my limiting beliefs. It was like, well, what does that even look like? What does that even sound like? What does that feel like in my body? And by the way, what does a practice of speaking to myself with love and compassion look like and sound like and feel like? Because there is no amount of me staring in the mirror that day she said that and going, I love you, Sam. I forgive you, Sam, that would have ever done the trick. I have been in practice doing that work for a decade. But if not for that woman interjecting this new, bigger idea that I couldn't see or know on my own, I don't know where I would be right now. So it's really interesting, the idea of someone outside of us coming in and poking the bear and disrupting.
But that's
this
what we
cycle.
need.
Yes, we do.
Our mind is designed to protect us, and that's not just from saber-toothed tigers. The fear and response situation for all activities in life will create a response from the mind that keeps your emotional self safe. So that means it's going to create traits, mannerisms, and characteristics about you, ways that you hold yourself, ways that you navigate partnerships to protect yourself from whatever was pained in the beginning. The mind is just simply putting up silks I like to call them silks that can be walls. They're pictures. You walk up to them. You believe in your heart of hearts what you're seeing is your limitation or your shameful item or whatever it is, because on the other side might be pain. So you stare it in the face until you what? You figure out that it's not real and you walk through it. And nobody's good enough to walk through them all, because we will give each and every one of them life. We will make them solid. We will stand and scream in the face of what? A piece of silk that we could have walked through thinking that we're protecting ourselves. We need a third party to sit down with us and run interference, negotiate with the mind, let it know, or let the person know, hey, look, you've got somebody out in front of you that is giving you false images to protect you, right? Might as well be like, do you remember A Clockwork Orange?
Oh, yeah.
Right? It's kind of like having your eyes held open like that and everything fed to you, right? But it's not real. It's you telling you all of those things.
Yeah. And what I want to add to that, and there's research on this, shame thrives in secret. The way I view shame is like,
it's like fungus,
like a cockroach.
Mushroom.
So I'm speaking about, back in the day when I was young and broke and trying to be a famous recording artist, living in Manhattan, plenty of those apartments were infested with cockroaches.
I grew up in South Florida in a field on a dairy in the middle of nowhere. I used to have to arm wrestle them for my shitty Wick cereal.
There you
go. I'm good.
There you go. Right? So here's the pattern. I was staying over at the time. He was my boyfriend. Now he's my husband. I was staying over at his apartment. He had a loft bed, and I'd always have to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. Creeped out. Turn the lights on, all the cockroaches scattered. In the morning, I would go into the kitchen and I'm like, motherfucker, I knew it because all the lights were off, the blinds were shut. I knew there were going to be roaches everywhere. And I'm like, turn the fucking lights on and they'll scatter. And then you just do the dishes really quick, turn on, scatter. Now,
when they're audible, you're in trouble.
Shit.
That's an unnecessary
they were
amount.
Okay, it was an infestation. We lived above a grocery store. It was disgusting.
Oh, man.
But hello, welcome to New York City. When you're 21, you do whatever you need to do to live there. And I think of that analogy all the time, because when you are the only one navigating your shame voice, you are living with what you think are the worst secrets of your life, the things that make you unworthy of love, connection, and belonging. So you keep them to yourself because you are literally so afraid that if you share them with anybody else, you will not be lovable. When in fact, what that does is it grows that shame gremlin. It grows it. It makes it feed and fester, and it dictates all the choices you're going to make.
I bet it looks like the Lamisil guy.
Oh, yeah.
It's him. He's like nasty. A fungus in the dark between your toes, just living it up.
It's disgusting. Like I get heebie-jeebies like when we're using these analogies, but truly, and so speaking about it to somebody else literally shines a light on the cockroach infestation inside of your cells and starts to diffuse its power over you. Because then you realize, and by the way, you have to do it with somebody who's trusted, who's not going to lacerate and judge you and shame you.
Don't tell Gertrude in the sewing circle, you're screwed.
Okay, let's have discernment on who we talk to. But assuming that we do that, a trusted friend who's gone through similar things, an advisor, a coach, a therapist, assuming it's somebody safe, you will see immediately how loved and accepted you actually are. And if that person is really a great person to talk to, they're going to share a very similar, maybe contextually different experience, but emotionally similar experience. And they will normalize yours, and you will feel like a ton of bricks came off your back. You cannot traverse shame by yourself unless you want to stay sick.
Mm. That's a beautiful explanation. And I think that more people should hear that, because we're so often stuck in a mindset where we believe everybody is actually focusing on us and our pain points, when in reality, they're focusing on their own. You don't have a god dang clue what's going on with you unless it's something that can put them in a better or worse position based off of how you look. Otherwise, they only care what they're wearing. I like to say, like, if you got dressed up for a party, right? You go in there, you're like, I'm wearing these shoes, I'm wearing this jacket or this dress, and this is how I'm going to do it. And I look dope, right? I'm ready. I'm going in, right? You show up, and what do? You walk up to another person that's dressed up, and you choose an item on that person, and you do what about it? You compliment it, right? And then they do what? They turn around and they compliment yours. Everything's complete now, and we rotate and we go around the room and do this shit. But when you go home, I want you to try to remember what anybody else's item was that you complimented. Or are you thinking about what people said about yours? 99% of the time, unless somebody's wearing like a giant globe for earrings, you're not going to remember, right? And you only said those look good because you didn't want to have anything else to say. You're like, oh, those are great. But you just do that, but everybody else went home too. They don't remember what you were wearing.
Mm-hmm.
They have no idea. But we put so much stock and effort into putting together that mask that we walk around through life with, or all of them, because there and again, you said we walk around in a fog or we're in that state, right? Well, in my mind, when you're in that fog, you have a lot of masks. And if you go out and ask yourself, how many voices do I have? It's a good clue as to how many masks you have. Go talk to your mom. Go talk to customer service. Go talk to your friend that rides bikes with you. Go talk to your friend that you have coffee with. Go talk to the friend. Watch how you conduct yourself and who you are in those moments. We have different voices. Go interview. Let's see if you talk the same there. You don't. But the reality is you're not just adding on a little bit of dust, to make yourself look better or whatever. You're actually creating a new persona that has to be maintained for the rest of your life whenever it's pulled out. That's memories. That's where did I leave off? Who am I ashamed of? Who is ashamed of me? All these things because I went out and I was somebody else in that mask that day. I was Jay. I was, Mike Myers. I was whatever. I was these people going through life. But what happens? At the end of the day, you've got this big bag of masks that's hunching you over and killing you because you have to remember them all. And sadly enough, they're like spider webs connected to your mind at the same time. And you feel it pulling on it. But the reality is they are that disconnectable. When we talk about, changing things in the moment, making a decision to not be that person again, that means that those spider webs can simply be pulled apart. You can drop your sack of masks at any given moment. And then I like to say you step off of a curb blindfolded thinking it's a cliff, right? To be yourself is the easiest damn thing in the world. Like, I'm a goof. I got bad language. I run around doing cartoon voices in my house. Doesn't matter. But you know what? The people I want around me are the ones that deal with the fact that Jay's a cartoon, right? They've got their quirks that are just as fun, right? But if I have to hide that, if I have to hide who I am in the presence of others, then I'm doing them a disservice because I was created perfect, right? Perfectly imperfect. And to not be myself is denying them the opportunity to meet the perfect version of me, right? And it's also a slap in the face of whomever or whatever made me.
Yeah. I mean, when you are riddled with shame, the tragedy is that you become self-obsessed.
Gotta maintain that shit.
right? And your world shrinks down. And you'll keep up with that masquerade if you don't believe you're worthy of anything bigger. And in my case, I really didn't believe I was until I hit that bottom. And the only thing I knew for sure was I didn't want to die, but I was also clueless about how to live. And I had to go through the 12 steps in a way that resonated, which is ultimately what I made my whole book about, a modern, practical approach to the steps, so that by the time we got through making amends to myself as opposed to everybody else, because I had done that so many times in 5 years of my sobriety, right? I had been the piece of shit addict who made all the mistakes all the time, but never ever.
People don't like to let that go either, because that's ground. They need that ground. So in case they F up, they've got you in a place where they're not as bad as you.
Yeah. But this is what I was being told to do in recovery, right? I wasn't being told to make amends to myself. I was, and I didn't believe in God. I couldn't get down with the religious intonation of the steps. And so there was nothing on the inside of me that I could trust that made me believe I was worthy of anything other than a shame-based lens through which I saw my life. And so I had to work those steps in a totally new way in order to hear my intuition. And then once I could hear it, and she started to nudge me in different directions, and I took her suggestion instead of taking my shame voice and my critical voice and taking that direction because I knew how that ended. I knew that ended up really shitty. So I'm like, well, what if I listen to this other voice that sounds like way more compassionate, way more curious, way more calm, by the way? It was always like a little whisper. What if I listened to her? What if I took an actionable step in the direction that she's nudging me? And let me just test it out and see if it ends up better. It ends up making me feel better about myself than when I listen to the shame voice or the critical voice. And sure enough, lo and behold, it was 1,000 times better, right? But I had to take the leap before I had evidence that it was going to work. The only evidence I had was that shame and criticism that was ruminating between my two ears was killing me. And it had killed many, many people I loved. And by the way, it would go on to kill many other people that I loved as well. So I was at a crossroads, knowing I couldn't freaking live that way anymore. And so maybe this other voice that I could only hear after making amends to myself, by the way, that I could only hear, maybe she knows better for me.
Acknowledged.
Right? So, it's funny because in the wake of releasing my book, so many people have written and said, I cannot believe your transparency. I cannot believe your vulnerability. It's so incredible how you can speak to that. And it's like, I know I wrote that exactly for those people who are bottled up on the inside, addict or not, with some level of shame, who feel like if they share it, they will be chastised forever. And by me getting to the other side of my shame and sharing my hardest things from a healed place, I am giving other people permission to do the same. And for me,
there you go.
It's the easiest thing in the world for me now to be open and honest about my hardest lived experiences. But it was not always the case. Who I am today is a direct result of the micro habits, the micro changes I have been making over the past decade, the little wins of my intuition and I kind of going together out there in the unknown and taking a risk on my life and having it burst the doors open on what I thought was possible for me. And so today, yeah, you're right. I can go and write a book about my hardest things, but people are terrified. They're terrified. And if all I do for the rest of my life is give people permission to be open and honest about their hardest things so that their shame doesn't corrode their cells and potentially kill their spirit or their actual physical body, then I have done my job.
Well, I say job well done. You're creating keys for people to pick up and unlock whatever lock it applies to with them. I believe we have a series of them that we all carry, and that it is our job to make our own unique keys and lay them on the ground everywhere around us for someone else to find when it's their time to find it, right? And that's exactly what you've done, is you've made a key that multiplies over and over again, and people have the opportunity to find whether or not it fits their first lock, their last lock, or one in the middle, right? But it has the opportunity for use. And it's up to them at that point. We don't have to be married to what we've made or created, because if we loved what we were creating, it doesn't matter where it lands at that point, because the joy came from what? Creating it.
Yeah.
Right. And I also think that we bring up what it's like to criticize ourselves, right? And that we're our own worst critics, and we let the shame monster sit there with us the whole nine, right? Well, if we personally find ourselves unlovable, right, to the degree that we're willing to hide from others who we are, how would we expect anybody else to love us as well? We've already showed them in advance that we're not worth it through our actions, the way we treat ourselves, the way we treat others, or simply the inner critic having the light on inside of you, abusing you, lets people know around you that you're in duress. Whether or not they know what it is, they feel your inauthenticity, right? It's why people lose at interviews. They go in there and they say every single thing right. But if you have the right person screening it, they're going to look at him and be like, I know he said that, but I don't believe him.
Yep.
You know why? Because he doesn't believe himself, right? So until you believe yourself, you can't expect other people to listen or believe you either. That's why it's so important to grab that child, that person that has done these things that they're supposed to be ashamed of, and hold them and love them for who they are. Find out what happened to them that said that their best trait or quality was not allowed in the room, right? Maybe it's their mouth. Maybe it's their talent. Maybe it's a bully or a family member telling you shouldn't do that, right? Even though that happened to be your thing. But the only reason they told you not to do it is because they weren't willing to go out on a limb and do their thing.
Exactly.
Much easier to slap you down. That creates addictions later in life.
Yep.
Just like abuse, just like trauma, the inability to express yourself, your true flame, right? Anytime you speak to somebody and you take away their passion, their purpose, or their true authenticity, you're placing a piece of glass, like a cup, over the top of their flame and only letting a little air in for the rest of their lives. They'll never see their full potential until what? Somebody comes in and smashes that bitch with a hammer, right? And then what happens? You write books, you get sober, you start helping people day in and day out through your actions, not through your desires. You simply are living you. You're learning about you. And when you do that, it allows other people to be themselves. That's the other byproduct. Man, if I stand up and start making cartoon voices and acting like an idiot and running around my house and just being Jay, right? What does somebody else get to do? They get to laugh and be themselves in their own way. Because we're goofy sons of bitches at our core. We're kids. For some reason, we layer on this, we will be ashamed of acting this way. So you must show up with that which does not cause shame. I have to wear my no shame jacket. But I like my jacket that's fucking doodled on. I like the one that says like, yo, on the back or some stupid shit like that, because that's me, right? That's who I am. But when I show up to work or I show up to that party or I show up to school or wherever it's at, and I've got on my blue blazer of love, or blue blazer of life, then I'm screwed because nobody knows who I am and I don't know who they are because I'm too busy trying to change myself. And that's honestly where addictions start.
Yep.
Right? Because we're in so much pain from holding back ourselves that we have to sit there and medicate that child from feeling it anymore. It's so sad because in reality, again, one slap of that glass and that person is at their full potential again.
Yep. Yeah. It's, going back to the idea of being out and being so full of shame and self-obsessed that really all you care about is how you look and what you're wearing and what other people think of you, right? When you do the work to clear the shame, when you slowly start to have wins in the direction of your worthiness, what happens is you don't go to places to try to be interesting. You go to places to be interested. And it's a ripple effect of what happens. So you do the really deep work to start loving on yourself again. So you get to show up and actually be curious about what somebody else is working on that matters to them. And all of a sudden, you might come up with ways where you can provide value to what they're working on. And guess what you just did? You just helped somebody.
Your inner critic is working full time. And guess how that makes you feel? The inside of yourself like can never listen to those around you.
So
sorry.
Yeah. So it's, but again, right, we got to start at the roots. We got to excavate those dirty, disgusting weeds that are messing up the growth of that beautiful tree. Once we do that, when we go out into the world, all the doors of possibility bust open, because the moment that you start to care about something other than yourself, every opportunity you've ever pined for when you were self-obsessed is going to show up.
100%. The more that you act on your purpose, your passion, and who you are inclined to be on a day-to-day basis, the more people will show up, the more things that will come into your line or your path for your destination, it'll start lining up. I use that radio frequency all the time as a way to explain it. When you change your dial, you will not move your location, but you will change what you're hearing. And the people around you that enjoy the same music or are on that particular station will gravitate to you. You don't have to worry about who you're leaving behind. That's the beauty of all this, right? Once you've discovered self, and maybe you are entrenched with people that are not necessarily giving you the right support for, growth, you will simply change your dial and they will just atrophy. They'll slide away. They might have a word or two to say, but more than likely they're going to run. And they're going to run because you represent a version of themselves that they're not willing to bring out yet, right? And let them go, because the best thing that you can do for the people around you is be yourself as much as you possibly can, to work on yourself, to meditate, to find your inner peace. Because what happens? You become a lighthouse for others to find their way. Because maybe they fell 6 times, but the one thing they noticed all 6 times that they fell? It was that Dr. Hart was still standing every time I hit the ground. Mm-hmm. She was always there, right? That's going to stick in the back of their head, and they're going to resent that you're standing there because they're going to think you're looking at them at first. But that's only their own mind saying, I'm being judged. When in reality, they're going to come to a moment and they're going to say, look at her. She's kicking ass. Why didn't I listen? Or what can I emulate? Or how did they do it? right? But that's when what? When they find the key that you put down, right? That's when they're going to read that book. That's when they're going to look at it and they're going to say, thank you, right? Thank you for going out and showing strength and vulnerability, right? We have to do that. There's a lot more strength and vulnerability than there is in putting up a false front every single time. The louder you are, the weaker you are. It's that simple.
I have a tattoo on my back that says vulnerability is my superpower. And,
see, look at that. Everything happens for a reason.
So for the listener right now, right? I want to do what I do for a second, which is be guttural. Okay. We're sitting here talking about how good it can get when you do the work, right? And boy, that sounds good. But let me give you real talk right now. Okay. Here's real life, real talk. 2 years ago, on March 13th in 2022, I got a phone call that my sister died of a drug overdose.
So sorry.
Thank you. When I tell you that I knew in that moment that I had 3 choices for my life. One was to relapse and die because my first sponsor, after 22 years sober from heroin addiction, relapsed and committed suicide. And I knew if I touched it again, I was dead. Okay. And that was a choice I could have made in that moment because believe me, part of me wanted to die in that moment. Choice number 2. Give in to the pain because it was unbearable in the beginning. Choice number 2 was to try and outrun my grief, to numb it in all the various ways we can numb our pain in today's society. I tried to do that when my dad died. It didn't work. I spent 2 years running from my grief, only to have it catch up to me, only to have to feel it all anyway. And in those 2 years, I birthed...
It's a slinky.
That's right. I birthed nothing into the world. I created nothing. I shrunk in the presence of my pain. And the third option would be to feel it all and to trust that in that moment, I knew whoever I was going to be on the other side of this loss was going to be a totally different version of myself. I knew I couldn't keep running my private practice and exclusively be Samantha, the physical therapist, that I had to write a book, tell a story, and turn this pain into something purposeful. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what I was doing. I literally left a field that got me into so much debt, by the way, to get the goddamn degree. I started a private practice. It was successful. I left it all behind because I knew I had to, but I didn't know anything else. And I just want to paint a picture for the listener. Okay. So out of the worst tragedy of my life and deciding to turn toward my suffering, this is what my life started to look like. I took a job while I was writing my book, teaching dance at a gym. I am a professional dancer. I have taught all over the place in the best studios in New York and LA. You couldn't have paid me enough money to say, oh yeah, I'll teach again in a gym when I'm 40. But you know what? Equinox needed a teacher. I shot my hand up for some reason, took the spot. Great. I'm teaching dance again. I love dance. 3 months into teaching, this man walks into my class 30 minutes late and I'm rolling my eyes thinking, oh my God, this guy, either he's a total idiot and he's going to be terrible and be like, uh-oh, shouldn't have done that. Or he's going to be some trained dancer who
he's got a rose in his pocket all the time that he snaps into his teeth.
Right? I was like
I want to meet that guy.
What's about to happen? Of course, he's the magician. He crushes the routine after the class. I'm like, who the hell are you? We're in the suburbs, for God's sakes. We're not in Hollywood. Where did you come from? What are you doing here? He said, oh, I'm a recording artist. I was in a big boy band when I was young and now I'm a solo artist. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, that's interesting. Do you have a choreographer? Because that was a dream of mine when I was young. And then my cocaine addiction took off so severely that I totally derailed any pursuit of entertainment. And I just went and got my degree like a good little girl. And I put myself out there. And he said, no, actually, I don't. We had coffee. We connected. I said, can I take one of your songs and make something up and just see if you like my work? So I did. I created my own luck. He didn't ask me to do that, but I sure as hell wasn't going to waste an opportunity. And he said, I love your work. You're hired. Turns out he was going on a 2-week tour in Japan to 5 different cities. And guess who came with him as a 40-year-old woman with 2 babies at home as his choreographer? I fucking did. Last year, I was running around in Japan like an idiot, shaking my ass and flipping my hair around while my husband held the fort down so I could pursue a lifelong dream. Now, by the way, that's just one tiny little thing that has happened over the last 2 years because I decided to turn toward my suffering and wear my vulnerability on my sleeve and tell people the truth about my life and what I care about, which is essentially helping others and taking my pain and repurposing it into something meaningful. So the next thing that happened is that I sang in the background while we were on tour. And he said, do you know how to sing? And I'm like, yeah, kind of. It's kind of what I wanted to do with my life before I became a PT. Well, we should make music together. Started making original music with him. Eventually, I ended up meeting Grammy award-winning musicians, multi-platinum producers who said, well, you're not a teenager who's trying to get a record deal. We get that. But you have this book and you have this whole reframe of the 12 steps. You can sing, you can dance. You're a podcast host, you're a doctor. You're basically creating a brand that can be seriously monetized. And we want to get behind this and see where it goes. So I am currently working on an album that corresponds to the messages in my book. I have interest from Warner Brothers to make a documentary about my story. I've written a screenplay. When I was done making all the final edits to my book, and it was time to get into the fun stuff like cover design, right? All the cool artsy stuff and all the heavy lifting of re-examining my hardest memories and writing it down on paper was done. I said, I'm going to run in the direction of my dreams because I'm meeting all these industry people. I've always wanted to write a screenplay. So why not now? People thought I was crazy. Why don't you wait till your book is a bestseller? Why don't you wait and see how the book does before you? No, I don't.
Not how life works.
I don't wait. I don't do that. I run in the direction of my dreams because I've already lost the things that mean the most to me. And I have literally nothing to lose and everything to gain. So now I'm shopping my screenplay around. And I just got interest from the largest talent agency in the world by accidentally meeting somebody on a rooftop in Hollywood after a speaking event that I put on for myself. And this woman said, wow, you're what we call in our world a multi-hyphenate. You're really good at a lot of different things. Your agency must be so proud of you. And I looked at her.
What's that?
I looked at her and said, well, actually, I don't have an agent yet, but I sure hope that when I do, they see the value in that I am not one thing, but I am many. And I am in talks with getting signed with them right now. So when we sit here and say, the whole world opens up to you,
it literally
that joy
does.
is on the other side. When you hold hands with your suffering, we are speaking from a guttural, lived place. This is not some bullshit, spiritual bypass, woo-woo, wave a wand, and your whole life will change conversation. This is real, tried, and true. Trudging through the goddamn mud when you want to give up and die and putting one foot in front of the other anyway.
Action is the only road to success. If you're not moving, you're not creating. Stagnant people do not achieve their dreams. They remain what? Dreams. You can all have those. I want realities, right? I don't want dreams. I want to live in a moment. When I started this show and I started working in audio, I didn't have a background in it, But if I met somebody the day after I started, you bet I damn well said I was a podcaster. Do you know why? Because I was.
Yep.
Why am I any less of one than somebody who's been doing it for 20 years? I chose today that I'm one, and I'll get to their level. But don't tell me what I'm not. Because the moment you tell me what I'm not, you gave me a limitation. I don't believe in your limitations. I set my own, and they're non-existent. I'm capable of anything. Don't tell me piano's hard, because then you're giving me a limitation in advance, right? Maybe I could have been that gifted talent, but that one sentence put me at a disadvantage to myself, right? Live your true potential. Don't let anybody limit you. Listen to Dr. Hart when she says that it is guttural, right? But the cool thing is once you've gone through the guttural piece, then you're done with it, right? It's almost like you get a badge of honor. You can put it on your chest, bro. I've been in the gutter, right? But look at me now. I'm living happily. This doesn't define me, right? Who I am now does. And I think you're giving people an opportunity to be themselves, to find themselves. And I do want to ask one question before we wrap up. And it can be quick because I know you have to go, right? But I want people to get an extra tool. You're a yoga person as well, correct?
I sure am.
So I'm a big fan. I'm a meditator. I've been doing it for about 6 or 7 years now, daily. And I like to say that we need clarity to find our way. And if you could give people one actionable piece of advice to help them find that clear space with which to identify what we're talking about, because it's not always going to be handed to us. It's not always going to be broadsided, but if you're aware and waiting, you'll see it. So how does somebody do that?
Yeah. I joke that yoga was the boyfriend that was good for me that I wasn't ready to date. And now we're married. I love him. Okay. But here's the thing. Let's say the listener isn't into yoga. Let's say the listener is like, okay, everybody's told me to meditate. I can't find the time, whatever. For me, the truth about yoga is it is just one giant moving meditation. And that is when I get some of the greatest intuitive insights of my life. I just got one recently in yoga and I'm about to start a whole monthly event as a result of it, right? However, what I've been doing with the clients that I coach lately, the way I actually start the session, but sometimes depending on how worked up their nervous system is getting in session, because the truth is we're talking about clarity and calmness, and that cannot happen when the brain is dysregulated, period. So what do we have access to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so long as we're living? Our breath. There you go. Yep. Now, you don't have to sign up. You don't have to sign up for a breathwork class either. You could literally be dysregulated, angry, irritated, scared, frustrated at work, go into the bathroom stall and do what I'm about to say, which is if you close your eyes and you picture a big, beautiful bouquet of flowers, and that's what you're going to be smelling on the inhale. And then you picture your favorite birthday cake and it's filled with candles, even if you're young. Maybe it's grandma or grandpa's birthday cake. Okay, lots of candles on it. And that's what you picture on the exhale. All you have to do 3 times in a row. It'll take less than 30 seconds. Take a long inhale through your nose, smelling that bouquet of flowers. When you get to the top, sip in a tiny bit more air, just a tiny bit. So you really fill up the lung sac with oxygen. And then you slowly, mindfully exhale through your mouth, blowing out all those imaginary candles on the birthday cake. Do that 3 times. Your nervous system will literally go from sympathetic to parasympathetic. And it is only in that state, which is what yoga does for me. It puts me in a steady parasympathetic state, that your mind will be clear of clutter and you will be able to access the whisper of your intuition.
Love it. So tell everybody your website where they can find you, and we'll go from there. We'll go ahead and wrap up.
Yeah. My website is Dr. SamanthaHart.com, HARTE. And that's also all my social media handles. So you guys can go on there and see all the things I'm doing. You can message me on Instagram. I'm also going to give you a link for the show notes, if that's okay,
Absolutely.
which is a book giveaway. And I'm so excited to be doing this on all the podcasts.
Right on.
The first 10 people that put their information in will get a signed copy of my book. I'll FedEx it to you so you can
Love
have
it.
it. And yeah, there's just so many ways to stay in touch with me and work with me. So reach out. And it's been such a pleasure talking to you.
And amazing. Thank you for being you. I genuinely appreciate the information that you've given to our listeners and the path that you're walking, the example you're setting. And thank you to all of our listeners as always. And remember, be cool and keep learning.